My name is Clara, and I'm 28 years old. My parents looked me dead in the eye, their faces a mask of counterfeit sympathy, and told me that my grandmother's entire $10 million estate was going to my sister. They did it in a lawyer's conference room where my grief was still so new, so raw it felt like a physical wound. They thought they had won. They thought that I, the quiet daughter, the one who had spent her life avoiding confrontation, would simply crumble and accept it. What they didn't know was that my grandmother wasn't just a victim in this story, she was the architect of its ending. And she had left one final secret, not on paper, but on a videotape that was about to completely and utterly destroy their carefully constructed world. If you're watching this right now, drop a comment letting me know where you're viewing from. Before I tell you this life-altering story, hit that like button and subscribe to hear more real stories about family betrayal and the hidden strength we never know we have until we're forced to find it. Before everything fell apart, my life was defined by its quiet simplicity. I was a freelance graphic designer, a world I'd built for myself from my small, sun-filled apartment on the outskirts of the city. It wasn't a glamorous life, but it was mine. I paid my bills on time, tended to a small jungle of houseplants that were my leafy companions, and found a deep, fulfilling joy in creating beauty out of nothing but a blank screen and an idea. My most important relationship, the anchor of my entire existence, was with my grandmother, Eleanor. She was my sanctuary, my quietest and most constant cheerleader. Even as the cruel fog of dementia began to roll in and obscure the brilliant landscape of her mind, her love for me remained a lighthouse, a steady, unwavering beam. My relationship with my parents, Mark and Sarah, and my older sister Jessica, was a different story entirely. From our earliest days, our roles in the family play were cast in unbreakable molds. Jessica was the star charismatic, extroverted, and a black hole for attention. She was the golden child, the one destined for greatness. I was the quiet one, the artist, the observer, perpetually in the wings. My parents, a duo obsessed with social status and the flawless performance of a perfect family, poured every ounce of their attention and resources into Jessica. She was enrolled in ballet lessons and sent on ski trips. She received a brand new cherry red convertible for her 16th birthday. I was given a library card, which I cherished, and a part-time job at a local diner, which I used to painstakingly save for my first used computer. This injustice wasn't a series of grand, theatrical acts of cruelty. It was far more insidious than that. It was a constant, flowing undercurrent of favoritism, a death by 1,000 paper cuts. I remember with painful clarity when I was 17, after working double shifts all summer, I finally saved enough for a used car. It was a beat-up, 10-year-old Honda, with a dent in the passenger door and a radio that only picked up static. But it was mine. It was freedom on 4 wheels. I was incandescent with pride. 2 weeks later, Jessica, armed with a brand new license and a sense of entitlement, took it without asking. She was texting a boy and wrapped my car around a telephone pole. When my parents came home to the scene, there was no lecture for her. Instead, their disappointment was aimed at me. "Clara, you know your sister is an inexperienced driver," my mother said, her voice laced with accusation. "You should have been more responsible and hidden the keys." They never offered a single dollar to help fix it. Jessica never uttered the words, "I'm sorry." Instead, a month later, they bought her a new SUV to help her get over the trauma of the accident. My Honda was left to rust in the backyard, a monument to my secondary status. When college arrived, the disparity sharpened into a blade. Jessica set her sights on a prohibitively expensive private school out of state for a communications degree. My parents didn't hesitate, draining their savings and taking out a second mortgage, proudly broadcasting to all their friends about their ambitious, high-achieving daughter. When I was accepted into a prestigious, nationally ranked art program at the local state university, my father clapped me on the shoulder. "Great, Clara," he said with a dismissive smile. "At least state school is cheap." They made it painfully clear they wouldn't be contributing. "Jessica needs a head start in a cutthroat field," my mother explained, as if it were the most logical thing in the world. "Art, well, that's more of a hobby, isn't it? You can figure that out on your own." So I did. I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3 through 4 grueling years of college. I survived on instant noodles and caffeine, took out a mountain of student loans, and graduated with honors. Jessica, meanwhile, dropped out after 3 semesters, proclaiming that the structured environment was stifling her creativity, and moved back home into her old room. My parents welcomed her with open arms, converting my childhood bedroom into a meditation and yoga studio for her while I was sharing a cramped dorm room with 2 other people. Even into our adult years, the dynamic never wavered. I was the responsible one, the designated tech support, the one they called when they needed a ride to the airport or someone to sit with grandma on weekends. Jessica was the perpetual vanity project, lurching from one failed business idea to the next, a high-end dog clothing line, a lifestyle blog, a YouTube channel focused on mindfulness, each venture funded by my parents and burning through tens of thousands of dollars before being unceremoniously abandoned for her next whim. I never asked them for a dime. My independence was my badge of honor, but it was also my shield, a necessary defense against their inevitable disappointment. Grandma Eleanor was the only one who saw through the facade. "They don't see the steel in you, Clara," she'd tell me during her more lucid moments, her papery hand gripping mine with surprising strength. "But I do. They mistake your quiet for weakness. It's your greatest strength. Don't ever let them convince you otherwise." She was the one who bought me my first professional set of oil paints, the one who framed my clumsy childhood drawings and hung them in her hallway as if they were masterpieces. Her unwavering love was the validation I craved, but never received from my own parents. As her dementia progressed, my role evolved into her primary caregiver. I cherished that time. I would visit her every single day after work, preparing her favorite meals, reading her worn-out mystery novels aloud, or simply sitting with her in a comfortable silence, holding her hand as she drifted. My parents and Jessica would make their obligatory appearances on major holidays, snapping the perfect, smiling photos for their social media feeds before making hasty excuses to leave. "It was just too painful," they'd say, "to see her that way." For me, it wasn't painful. It was a privilege. It was a chance to give back a small fraction of the boundless, unconditional love she had poured into me. I honestly thought I could endure my family's dynamic forever, as long as I had her. But I had no idea that her passing wouldn't be the end of our story, but the explosive catalyst for a war I was never prepared to fight. The storm broke with a jarring phone call at 3 in the morning. The clinical, detached voice on the other end was from the nursing home. My grandmother had passed away peacefully in her sleep. For years, I had tried to brace myself for this moment, but the reality of it was a physical blow. It felt like the floor had dropped out from beneath me, sending me into a freefall. The anchor of my world, the one person who saw and loved me for exactly who I was gone. My hand shook as I dialed my parents, my voice a strangled whisper. Their reaction was unnervingly practical. "Oh, okay, honey," my mother said, her tone lacking any genuine warmth, as if I'd just informed her of a canceled appointment. "I'm so sorry. Your father and I will handle things in the morning." There was no, "Are you okay?" "No, we'll be right over. Just logistics." In the days that followed, my personal, profound grief was completely bulldozed by the chaotic steamroller of my family's planning. My parents seized control with an unnerving efficiency. They chose an ostentatious funeral home with marble floors and gaudy chandeliers, a place that felt more like a Las Vegas hotel than a place of mourning. They selected a gilded casket that my grandmother, a humble woman whose greatest joy was the dirt under her fingernails from her garden, would have absolutely despised. When I gently, timidly suggested we use a simple pine box and fill the chapel with wildflowers from her own garden, Queen Anne's lace and black-eyed Susan's, my mother shot me a look of pure disdain. "Clara, we need to show respect," she said, her voice sharp. "That means lilies and roses from a proper florist. We have to think about what people will say." Respect, in their vocabulary, was a synonym for performance. Jessica was a ghost, communicating primarily through a series of performative Instagram posts. She curated a slideshow of old, filtered photos of her and Grandma, accompanied by lengthy, plagiarized-sounding captions about losing her best friend and guiding light. She hadn't visited my grandmother in over 6 months. The blatant hypocrisy made my stomach turn, but I was too numb and exhausted by sorrow to summon the energy for a confrontation. The true catalyst, the event that finally shattered my last fragile illusion about my family, arrived a week after the funeral. It was a crisp, cream-colored envelope from the law firm of Henderson and Associates. Mr. Henderson had been my grandmother's lawyer for over 40 years and was a man I respected deeply. The letter formally requested the presence of myself, my parents, and Jessica at his office for the reading of the will. I didn't think much of it. Grandma lived modestly, or so I thought. I assumed she'd left her small, cozy house and whatever was left in her savings account to be divided amongst us. For me, her real legacy was the hours we'd spent together, not the numbers in a bank account. That morning, I arrived at the lawyer's stately downtown office wearing a simple black dress that felt like a second skin of mourning. My parents and Jessica were already there, seated in plush leather chairs. They looked less like a grieving family and more like a corporate board about to execute a hostile takeover. Jessica was in a severe designer pantsuit, checking her phone while my parents whispered conspiratorially, casting strange, appraising glances my way. Mr. Henderson, an older gentleman with a kind face and gentle eyes, greeted me with a warm, sincere handshake. "Clara, I'm so deeply sorry for your loss," he said quietly, and I knew he meant it. "Your grandmother was a truly remarkable woman." As we settled around the massive, polished mahogany table, the air in the room grew thick with an unspoken tension. Mr. Henderson began by explaining that Eleanor's will was very specific and clear. He read through a few small bequests to the local animal shelter and the public library, charities she had loved. Then he got to the main event. "As to the remainder of my estate," Mr. Henderson read, his voice steady and even, "including all liquid assets, stocks, bonds, and real estate holdings with an estimated total value of approximately $10 million. My jaw literally dropped. The air rushed out of my lungs. 10 million? My grandmother, the woman who drove a 20-year-old Buick and taught me how to grow tomatoes, had a fortune of that magnitude? My head swiveled to my parents. Their faces were impassive. They weren't surprised. They knew. They had known all along. But the bigger shock was still to come. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. Eleanor decided to leave her entire estate to a single beneficiary. He paused for dramatic effect, and in that pregnant silence, I saw a smug, triumphant smile flicker across Jessica's face. My parents exchanged a subtle, affirming nod. They thought it was Jessica. They had assumed, without a shadow of a doubt, that it would be Jessica. And for one insane, heart-sinking moment, so did I. But then Mr. Henderson lifted his gaze from the document and looked directly, pointedly, at me. "That sole beneficiary is her granddaughter, Clara Evans. The room went utterly, profoundly silent. I couldn't breathe. Me? All of it? Jessica looked like she'd been physically slapped. My mother's face went chalky white. My father's rigid with a barely contained fury. The storm had just made landfall, and I was standing in the very eye of it, completely unaware that the strongest, most destructive winds were yet to come. The profound silence in the conference room was shattered by Jessica's sharp, incredulous scoff. "What? That's completely ridiculous," she snapped, her head whipping around to face my parents. "There's obviously been a mistake. Grandma was senile. This will isn't valid. It can't be." Him, my father, ever the one to regain his composure first, took charge, his voice a low rumble of false authority. "Mr. Henderson, we appreciate your time, but it's abundantly clear my mother's mental state was in a significant decline these last few years. As her children, and as the natural heirs, we will need to formally review this matter. This is preposterous." "I can assure you, Mark, Mr. Henderson replied coolly, his gaze unwavering, "that Eleanor was of completely sound mind when she executed this will 2 years ago. At my insistence, she underwent a full competency evaluation with a geriatric specialist. I have the signed and notarized medical report to prove it." This inconvenient fact didn't seem to penetrate their bubble of indignation. In the car on the way home, the silence was a weapon. I sat in the back of my father's silent, sterile luxury sedan, feeling like an alien species that had just crash-landed in their midst. $10 million. The number echoed in my head, a nonsensical string of zeros. My first coherent thought wasn't of the wealth, the cars, or the houses. It was a single, overwhelming question. Why? Why had she placed this monumental trust, this incredible burden, on me? The calculated escalation began that very evening. My parents summoned me for a family meeting at their house. The living room felt like an interrogation chamber. Jessica was perched on the edge of the sofa next to them, her arms crossed, her expression a mask of petulant defiance. I sat in the armchair opposite them, feeling the familiar weight of their collective disapproval. "Clara," my mother began, her voice dripping with a syrupy, manipulative sweetness that always set my teeth on edge. "We all know how much you adored your grandmother, and we know she adored you. But we have to be practical here. Entrusting a sum of money this large to someone as financially inexperienced as you would be utterly irresponsible. It's not what she would have wanted if she were thinking clearly." "Inexperienced?" I repeated, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "Oh, don't play naive," Jessica cut in, her voice sharp. "What could you possibly know about investing or asset management? You paint for a living, Clara. You'd burn through it in a year on canvas and organic groceries." "Sweetheart," my father said, leaning forward conspiratorially. "The right thing to do, the thing your grandmother would have truly wanted, is for that money to be managed by the family, for the good of all of us. I have decades of financial experience. We can secure Jessica's future, ensure your mother and I are cared for in our old age, and, of course, set aside a very reasonable portion for you." "A reasonable portion?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "We were thinking 10% is extremely generous." My mother chimed in quickly, clearly having rehearsed the number. $1 million. Just think of what you could do with that, Clara. You could pay off all your student loans, maybe even get a down payment on a nice little condo. It would be life-changing for you. They were talking about seizing 90% of my inheritance and framing it as an act of profound generosity. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it left me speechless. "But that's not what she wanted," I finally managed to stammer. "She was explicit. She didn't know what she was saying!" Jessica practically screamed, jumping to her feet. She favored you because you were always there, hovering over her like a little vulture, poisoning her against us. You took advantage of her dementia. That accusation felt like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of me. The countless hours I had spent with her, the quiet moments of love and connection, were being twisted into a sinister, calculated plot. I tried to defend myself, my voice trembling as I explained that I had no idea about the money, that my only desire was to honor my grandmother's last wish. It was like talking to a brick wall. They wouldn't listen. They just kept at it. A three-pronged attack of psychological warfare. My mother started to weep, accusing me of tearing the family apart with my selfishness. My father lectured me about familial duty and how I had forgotten my place. Jessica just stood there, a vicious smirk on her face, letting our parents do her dirty work. The assault didn't stop within the four walls of their home. A few days later, my phone started ringing. It was extended family, aunts and uncles I hadn't spoken to in years. My Aunt Carol called to tell me how ungrateful and disrespectful I was being. My Uncle Robert called to give me an unsolicited lecture on smart financial planning for the family unit. It was a coordinated attack. My parents were on a full-blown smear campaign, meticulously painting me as a greedy, manipulative granddaughter who had conned a poor, helpless old woman. I felt myself shrinking, becoming isolated and trapped in their narrative. I started to doubt my own sanity. Were they right? Was I really incapable of handling this? Was I being selfish? Should I just give in to make the attacks stop? To restore the fragile peace? The wake-up call, the jolt of clarity I so desperately needed, came from an unexpected source. Mr. Henderson called me one afternoon, his voice laced with concern. "Clara," he said, "your parents just left my office. They attempted to retain my services to formally contest the will. I refused, of course, on ethical grounds, but they were adamant. They told me they would find another lawyer who would. They are serious about this." He paused, and his next words were a lifeline. "I just want you to know, Clara, that Eleanor knew this might happen. She wasn't naive. She was a very sharp woman. She saw people for exactly who they were." Hearing that from him, an objective, professional third party, was like a splash of cold water to the face. It validated what my heart had been screaming at me. This wasn't about concern for my well-being. This was about pure, unadulterated greed. This was about control. And my family was willing to destroy my reputation and desecrate my grandmother's final wish to get what they wanted. I thanked Mr. Henderson, my voice shaking with a newfound strength, and hung up the phone. I sat in silence for a long time, the pieces of my life rearranging themselves into a new, harsher reality. My grief for my grandmother was now intertwined with the grief for the family I thought I had. A cold, hard resolve began to form in the pit of my stomach. They had underestimated me my entire life. They had mistaken my kindness for weakness, and my quiet for compliance. They were about to learn, in the most public way possible, the profound difference. But even as that resolve hardened into steel, I couldn't have imagined how far they would truly go. I thought I had seen the worst of their treachery, but the final straw was about to drop, and it would come in the form of a betrayal so calculated and cruel that there would be no coming back. The breaking point wasn't a shouting match or a dramatic confrontation. It was something far colder, an act of calculated treachery delivered to my inbox on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. It was an email from a lawyer I'd never heard of, a man named Arthur Vance. The message was brief, formal, and utterly devastating. It informed me that my family, acting as the executors of the estate, had officially filed a petition with the probate court to challenge the validity of my grandmother's will. But that wasn't the part that made my blood run cold. Attached to the email was a scanned PDF of a document they had submitted as their primary piece of evidence. It was a codicil to the will, a supposed amendment, allegedly signed by my grandmother just 3 months before she passed away. In this fabricated document, Eleanor supposedly declared that her prior will had been made under undue influence and duress, and that her true and final intention was to leave her entire estate to her children, Mark and Sarah, for equitable distribution amongst the family. I zoomed in on the signature at the bottom of the page. It was her name, in her handwriting, but it was a ghost of her former self. It was shaky, uncertain, the spidery scrawl of her final days when the dementia had tightened its grip, when she could barely hold a pen steady enough to sign a birthday card. A wave of nausea washed over me as the reality hit me. They had found something, anything she had signed in her most vulnerable state, and had built a monstrous lie around it. They had weaponized her own illness against me. They weren't just saying I had coerced her. They were using her own stolen hand, her own stolen voice to say it. The sheer, calculated cruelty of that act stole the air from my lungs. This was no longer about money. This was a profound violation. It was a vicious attack on the beautiful, sacred bond I shared with my grandmother. It was a brazen attempt to erase her true self and rewrite her legacy to serve their own greedy narrative. They had taken my purest act of love, caring for her in her final years, and twisted it into a crime. The feeling of betrayal was so absolute, it was almost paralyzing. I slid from my chair onto the floor of my apartment, clutching the printed-out email, the paper crinkling in my white-knuckled grip. The very foundations of my world felt like they were crumbling to dust. This was my family, the woman who gave birth to me, the man who was supposed to be my protector, the sister who shared my childhood, and they had united with chilling efficiency to annihilate me. I wept. Not quiet, sad tears, but gut-wrenching sobs of rage and heartbreak. I wept for the loss of my grandmother all over again, and for the death of the naive hope that, deep down, they truly loved me. When the tears finally subsided, a cold, deathly stillness settled over me. It was the moment of awakening. The moment when every excuse I had ever made for them, every fragile hope that I was just being too sensitive, evaporated into nothing. There was no more room for doubt. There was no more room for hesitation or second-guessing. They had declared war, and if they thought for 1 second I was going to crumble and surrender, they had no idea who they were dealing with. They had forgotten whose blood ran in my veins. I was Eleanor Vance's granddaughter, and Eleanor Vance never, ever backed down from a fight, especially when she was fighting for what was right. I pushed myself up from the floor, my movements stiff but deliberate, and wiped my tear-streaked face. The grief had morphed into a white-hot fury. The fury had morphed into a diamond-hard clarity. I wasn't fighting for $10 million anymore. I was fighting for the truth. I was fighting for my grandmother's honor. They had made a critical, fatal mistake. They thought they were coming after the quiet little girl who always colored inside the lines and never made a fuss. They didn't realize they had just awakened a woman who no longer had anything to lose and had everything to fight for. I had one shot to turn this around, and I was not going to fail. My fury became my fuel, a clean, high-octane energy that burned away all my fear and hesitation. The very next morning, my first call was to Mr. Henderson. My voice was steady, devoid of the tremor it had held just days before. I explained the forged codicil and the court filing. I was afraid they'd try something like this, he said, his voice grim and low. They are playing a very dangerous game. Can you be in my office at 2 p.m.? There's something I think you should see. Something Eleanor prepared. The quiet urgency in his voice sparked a flicker of hope inside me. When I arrived, he bypassed the formal conference room. Instead, he led me down a quiet, wood-paneled hall to a small, secure archive room dominated by a massive, old-fashioned vault. Eleanor was more than a client. She was a dear friend for over 40 years, Mr. Henderson said softly, as he expertly worked the combination dial. The tumblers clicked into place with satisfying finality. She was also one of the sharpest, most perceptive people I've ever known. She knew the character of her children all too well. She knew her will would be a declaration of war. The heavy vault door swung open with a quiet whoosh. Inside was a single, modest, safe deposit box. He placed it on a small viewing table and handed me a small, ornate silver key, attached to a tag that simply read, "For Clara." She gave this to me 2 years ago, along with a set of very specific, notarized instructions. I was only to give this key to you if and when they formally contested the will in a court of law. Her exact words were, "Clara will know what to do with it." My hands trembled, not with fear, but with anticipation, as I inserted the key and turned. The lock clicked open. Inside wasn't a stack of legal documents or stock certificates. It was an old silver iPad and a thick, cream-colored envelope, sealed with a wax stamp of a hummingbird, her favorite bird. My name was written on the front in my grandmother's elegant, familiar script. I carefully broke the seal and unfolded the letter. "My dearest Clara, if you are reading this, it means I am gone and the people who should love you most are failing you in the most profound way. I am so sorry, my dear. I am sorry for the lifetime of hurt they have caused you and the acute pain they are causing you now. I saw it for years, the way they overlooked your light, the way they prized Jessica's flash and sparkle while ignoring the steady, brilliant gem right in front of them. I have left you my estate, not because I loved my other children less, but because I trusted you infinitely more. Money can be a poison, a curse, in the wrong hands. In yours, I know it will be a tool for the creativity, kindness, and fierce independence you so richly deserve. They will fight you. They will lie. They will try to twist your love into a crime and paint you as the villain. That is why I have left you this. Do not think of it as a weapon of revenge, Clara. Think of it as a shield of truth. Be strong, my girl. You are forged from stronger stuff than you know. I have always been, and will always be, so incredibly proud of you. Oh, my love. Grandma. Tears of gratitude, not sorrow, blurred my vision as I picked up the iPad. My fingers felt clumsy as I powered it on. The screen flickered to life. There was only one file on the device, a video file simply and powerfully titled, "My Real Will." I took a deep breath and pressed play, and there she was, my grandmother. Not the frail woman from my final memories, but the vibrant, sharp-witted matriarch she had been just 2 years prior. The video was dated the same day she had signed the official will with Mr. Henderson. She was sitting in her favorite armchair in her living room, sunlight streaming through the window behind her, illuminating her like a halo. "Hello," she began, her voice clear and strong, looking directly into the camera lens. "My name is Eleanor Vance. Today is the 15th of June, 2023. I am here with my attorney, James Henderson, and I am of perfectly sound mind and body, a fact which has been medically certified today. This video is to serve as a living testament, a final clarification of my last wishes, to be used in the event of any dispute or challenge to my written will." For the next 15 minutes, my grandmother, with a calm and commanding grace, eviscerated their entire case before they even had a chance to make it. She spoke of her love for all her children and grandchildren. Then, with a heavy sigh, she spoke of her deep disappointment in Mark and Sarah's obsession with money and status, recounting specific instances of their manipulative behavior. She talked about Jessica with a sad fondness. "I love my granddaughter Jessica," she said, a flicker of pain in her eyes. "But she has been given every advantage and has never learned the value of anything. To give her a fortune would be an act of destruction, not an act of kindness." Finally, she spoke of me. And then there is Clara, she said, and her entire demeanor softened, a radiant, genuine smile spreading across her face. Clara, who has never asked for a single thing but has given me her time, her patience, her whole heart, who sat with me, held my hand, and listened to my old stories 100 times over, even when I started to forget them myself, who sees value not in dollars, but in love and connection. I am leaving everything to Clara because she is the only one who understands what a real legacy island. It isn't what you leave to people, it's what you leave in them. She concluded by looking straight into the camera, her gaze so intense it felt as if she were in the room with me. If anyone is challenging this document, know that this is my true, final, and uncoerced wish. I have done this with a clear heart and a clear mind. Do not dishonor my memory by trying to undo it. The video ended. I sat there, utterly polyexed, the tears of gratitude now flowing freely down my cheeks. This was it. This was everything. It was the truth, undeniable and irrefutable, in her own powerful voice. "What do we do now?" I asked Mr. Henderson, my voice no longer trembling, but ringing with a newfound resolve. "Now," he said, a slow, grimly satisfied smile spreading across his face. "We let them proceed. We let them file their motions, let them rack up their legal bills. We let them dig their own hole deeper and deeper. And when the time is right, at the official hearing, in front of a judge, we will let Eleanor have her final say. The plan was set. It was a high-stakes strategy, requiring a level of patience and nerve I didn't know I possessed, but it was perfect. I would not fight them in the court of public opinion or in the chaos of their living room. I would let them take this fight to the one arena where evidence outweighed emotion and truth, eventually had to prevail. A court of law. They thought they were in control of the narrative, but they had no idea my grandmother had already written the final, devastating chapter. The following 2 months were an exercise in excruciating patience. My family, now represented by the slick and morally flexible Arthur Vance, went on the offensive. They formally filed their lawsuit, submitting affidavits filled with such elaborate fictions they bordered on parody. They painted a heartbreaking picture of a confused, elderly woman, easily swayed by her manipulative granddaughter. They described how I had systematically isolated my grandmother, turning her against her loving family. Each legal document that arrived was a fresh assault, a new twisting of the knife, but I held fast to our secret weapon. My resolve, strengthened by Mr. Henderson's calm, steady guidance. "Do not engage," he constantly reminded me. "Let them build their grand case on a foundation of sand. The higher they build it, the harder it will fall." Finally, the day of the preliminary hearing arrived. It wasn't a full trial with a jury, but a critical hearing before a judge to present initial arguments and evidence. The courtroom was small, paneled in dark wood, and smelled of old paper and furniture polish. It felt solemn and intimidating. I sat at a table with Mr. Henderson, my hands clasped tightly in my lap to keep them from shaking. Across the aisle, my parents, Jessica, and Mr. Vance were a united front of smug confidence. They whispered amongst themselves, occasionally shooting pitying glances my way, the kind one gives to a lamb being led to the slaughter. Mr. Vance began his presentation. He moved with the oily grace of a seasoned performer, his voice dripping with false sympathy as he wove his tragic tale. He spoke of a beloved matriarch in the fog of dementia, preyed upon by her quiet, calculating granddaughter. He held up the forged codicil, brandishing it like a sacred text, irrefutable proof of Eleanor's true and final intentions. He spoke of my unnatural and unhealthy influence, of how I had driven a wedge between a mother and her devoted children. As he spoke, I watched the judge, a stern, no-nonsense woman in her 60s named Judge Miller. She listened intently, her face impassive, her pen scratching across a legal pad. For one terrifying moment, a sliver of doubt crept into my heart. What if she believed him? What if his performance was more compelling than the truth? Finally, it was Mr. Henderson's turn. He rose to his feet, not with the theatrical flair of Mr. Vance, but with a quiet, powerful dignity that immediately commanded the room's attention. "Your Honor," he began, his voice calm and clear, "what we have just heard is a compelling work of fiction, a narrative skillfully crafted to obscure a simple, ugly act of greed. We have medical documentation proving Eleanor Vance was of sound mind and body when she executed her original will. We have witness testimony that will speak to the plaintiff's true relationship with their mother. But rather than engage in a he said, she said debate, we would like to present one single piece of evidence that will resolve this matter definitively and unequivocally." Mr. Vance let out a dismissive chuckle. "And what evidence would that be, counsel? Another one of Miss Evans's finger paintings?" Mr. Henderson didn't even glance his way. "Your Honor, with the court's permission, we would like to play a short video. It is a living testament, a video will, recorded by Eleanor Vance herself." A stunned silence fell over the courtroom. I saw the first flicker of confusion, of panic, in my parents' eyes. Jessica stopped scrolling on her phone and looked up, her brow furrowed. Judge Miller looked intrigued, raising an eyebrow. "A living testament? That's a bit unorthodox, Mr. Henderson." "These are unorthodox circumstances, Your Honor. Mrs. Vance was a brilliant woman. She foresaw that her final wishes would be so callously challenged, and she took extraordinary measures to ensure her voice would be heard, loud and clear, from beyond the grave." The judge considered this for a moment, then nodded. "Very well. Proceed." Mr. Henderson signaled to a court clerk, who wheeled out a large monitor and placed it directly in front of the judge's bench. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. And then it began. The image of my grandmother, vibrant, smiling, and full of life, filled the screen. Her voice, clear and strong as a bell, echoed through the silent courtroom. "My name is Eleanor Vance." I couldn't bring myself to watch the screen. I watched my family. I saw the exact moment the blood drained from my mother's face as my grandmother began to speak of her disappointment in them. I saw my father's confident posture deflate, replaced by a slack-jawed, dawning horror. I saw Jessica's face contort from smugness to confusion, and then to pure, unadulterated panic. The video rolled on, an undeniable testament of truth. My grandmother spoke of her love for me, her voice filled with a warmth that seemed to fill the cold courtroom. She explained exactly why she trusted me with her legacy. When she delivered the line, "I am leaving everything to Clara because she is the only one who understands what a real legacy is," a choked, guttural sob escaped my mother's lips. Finally came the master stroke. My grandmother looked directly into the camera, her gaze piercing, as if she were speaking directly to Judge Miller across time and space. "If anyone is challenging this document, know that this is my true, final, and uncoerced wish. I have done this with a clear heart and a clear mind. Do not dishonor my memory by trying to undo it." The screen went black. The silence that followed was absolute, so heavy it felt like you could touch it. Judge Miller slowly took off her glasses, polishing them with a deliberate, almost theatrical slowness. She then put them back on and fixed my parents and Jessica with a gaze so cold it could have frozen fire. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice dangerously quiet, "do you have an explanation for this?" Mr. Vance was sputtering, his face the color of a ripe tomato. "Your Honor, this is a complete surprise. My clients, we were clearly misinformed about the The facts of the situation. Judge Miller's icy gaze shifted to my family. "I have seen and heard more than enough," she said, her voice ringing with authority. "This petition is dismissed with prejudice." The will, dated the 15th of June, 2023, stands as the final and binding testament of Eleanor Vance. Furthermore, I am referring this entire matter to the District Attorney's Office for immediate investigation into possible forgery, perjury, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Your behavior in this courtroom has been nothing short of despicable. Her gavel came down with a sharp, deafening crack. Court is adjourned. It was over. Just like that. The war was won. Mr. Henderson placed a steadying hand on my shoulder. "She did it, Clara," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "She got the last word." I risked a glance across the aisle. My family was in ruins. Their lawyer was gesturing furiously at them. They looked small, pathetic, and utterly broken. My mother was weeping uncontrollably into her hands. My father looked 10 years older, his face a gray mask of defeat. Jessica was just staring into space, her expensive facade shattered into a million pieces. They didn't dare look at me. I stood up on shaky legs and walked out of the courtroom with Mr. Henderson, and I did not look back. I didn't feel the thrill of victory I had expected. I didn't feel glee or a desire for revenge. I just felt a profound, bone-deep sense of relief, and a deep, aching sadness that it had ever come to this. The war was over. Now, the difficult work of rebuilding a life from the ashes could begin. Stepping out of the stale, recycled air of the courthouse and into the bright afternoon sunlight felt like emerging from a long, dark tunnel. I took a deep breath, and for the first time in months, it didn't feel constricted by anxiety. The world seemed sharper, the colors more vibrant. It was the feeling of a weight I didn't even realize I was carrying my entire life suddenly being lifted. "Mr. Henderson insisted on taking me for coffee, a small celebration. We sat in a quiet cafe as I slowly processed the magnitude of what had just happened. "What happens to them now?" I asked, my voice still a bit shaky. "The district attorney's office will investigate," he explained, stirring his drink. "With that video as evidence, they have a rock-solid case for forgery and perjury against your parents. They'll likely face significant fines, maybe even probation. But that is their battle to fight, Clara, not yours. Your involvement is over." His words were a key turning a lock I didn't know was holding me prisoner. My entire life had been a reaction to them, trying to please them, trying to avoid their disapproval, worrying about their problems. Now, I was free. The first few weeks were surreal. The silence from my family was a tangible presence. No angry phone calls, no manipulative texts, no dramatic voicemails, just an unnerving, complete void. I learned through Mr. Henderson that they had hired criminal defense attorneys and were scrambling to negotiate a plea deal. They were consumed by the consequences of their own actions, a concept so foreign to them it must have been terrifying. That silence gave me the space I needed to finally, properly grieve my grandmother, without the constant noise of their drama. I went to her house, which was now my house, and walked through her overgrown garden. I sat on her porch swing for hours, just remembering. It was a painful but necessary process. I hired a highly recommended wealth management firm to handle the complexities of the estate, allowing me to focus on healing. My first financial decision was a deeply personal one. I sat down at my computer and paid off my entire student loan balance in one lump sum. As I clicked submit, a wave of liberation so powerful it made me laugh out loud washed over me. I was beholden to no one. Then I did something purely for myself, something I had always dreamed of. I booked a one-way ticket to Italy, a place my grandmother and I had always talked about visiting together. I spent a month backpacking alone, from the canals of Venice to the hills of Tuscany. I filled sketchbooks in world-famous art galleries, ate life-changing pasta in tiny family-run trattorias, and learned to not just tolerate, but truly enjoy my own company. There, an ocean away from the wreckage of my family, I began the slow, quiet work of putting myself back together. When I returned, I felt like a different person, taller somehow, more confident, more grounded, more at peace. I sold my small apartment and made the decision to move into my grandmother's house permanently. It needed a lot of work, but I was a designer. It was the perfect project, a way to honor her past while building my own future. My family's initial fate eventually trickled down through the family grapevine. As Mr. Henderson predicted, they avoided jail time but were hit with crippling fines and several years of probation. Their reputation in their small, gossipy community was irrevocably tarnished. The wealthy friends they had spent a lifetime trying to impress now crossed the street to avoid them. Jessica, cut off from her parents' endless financial pipeline, was forced to get a real job for the first time in her life, working as a retail clerk at a local department store. One evening, about 3 months after the hearing, my mother called me. It was the first time I'd heard her voice. It was small and hesitant, stripped of its usual authority. "Clara," she said, and then paused for a long time. I just wanted to say I'm sorry." Oh, they were the 2 words I had yearned to hear my entire life. But when they finally came, they didn't bring the rush of validation I had always imagined. There was only a sad, hollow emptiness. "Thank you for saying that," I replied, my voice polite but distant. "Your father and we made a terrible, terrible mistake," she continued, her voice cracking. "We were so blind, so wrong." I didn't offer absolution. I just let the silence hang in the air between us. I no longer needed her approval. I no longer craved her validation. I was learning to generate my own. The conversation was short and excruciatingly awkward. She was searching for a way back, but I knew that some things, once shattered, can never be pieced back together in the same way. My new dawn had begun. It was a quiet, peaceful dawn, one I was building myself on a foundation of truth and self-respect. I didn't know what the future held for my relationship with the people who shared my DNA, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of it. I was in control of my own story, on my own terms, just as my grandmother had always intended. 1 year after the gavel fell, as the leaves in Boston began their brilliant, fiery transformation, my life had become a masterpiece I was painting myself. My grandmother's house, which I had painstakingly and lovingly restored, was no longer just a house. It was a home, filled with light, color, and art. The most significant change was the conversion of a spare bedroom into a sprawling art studio. Sunlight poured through the large windows, illuminating canvases in various stages of completion. Here, I spent countless hours rediscovering a part of myself I had long suppressed in the struggle to simply survive. My freelance design career had not just recovered, it had blossomed. With the freedom to be selective, I took on projects that fed my soul, collaborating with nonprofits, local theaters, and community arts programs. My most profound achievement, however, was the establishment of the Eleanor Vance Foundation for Emerging Artists. It was a nonprofit I founded using a significant portion of the inheritance to provide grants, mentorship, and studio space to talented young artists who, like the younger version of me, lacked the financial or familial support to pursue their dreams. Witnessing their raw talent flourish, knowing it was all part of my grandmother's legacy, gave me a deep sense of purpose that dwarfed any material possession. I had also, unexpectedly, built a new family, a chosen family. Mr. Henderson and his wife became dear friends, their warmth and wisdom a steady presence in my life. They often joined me for Sunday dinners that were filled with easy laughter. The artists from my foundation, a vibrant and eclectic group, filled my home with energy, creativity, and a sense of belonging I had never known. My life was rich and full, built not on obligation or blood, but on a foundation of mutual respect, shared passion, and genuine support. My birth family's fate had continued on its own inexorable trajectory. Karmic justice, it turned out, was a slow, patient force. My parents had been forced to sell their large, ostentatious house to cover their mounting legal fees and fines. They now lived in a small, nondescript condo. Their loss of social status, a constant, public reminder of their downfall. They reached out a few more times, with hesitant invitations for holidays and awkward, generic birthday cards. I agreed to meet them once for lunch at a neutral restaurant. The change was startling. They looked weary, diminished. They apologized again, this time with a depth that felt more genuine, born not just of consequence but perhaps of actual reflection. But as I listened, I realized their sorrow was primarily for the family they had lost, for the image that had been shattered, not from a true, empathetic understanding of the pain they had inflicted on me. I was polite, but maintained a clear, firm boundary. "We can be civil," I told them gently, "but the trust is gone. We can't go back to the way things were." They seemed to accept it with a sad, quiet resignation. It was the end of a long, painful chapter. Jessica's transformation was the most dramatic. Stripped of her financial safety net, she had hit rock bottom. The retail job didn't last, nor did the one after that. Finally, after months of struggling, she did something none of us could have predicted. She enrolled in a local community college, in a demanding program to become a paramedic. It was the first difficult, selfless thing I had ever known her to do. She sent me a long, handwritten letter. It was raw, honest, and stripped of all her usual artifice. She didn't make excuses. She owned her years of jealousy, her deep-seated insecurity, her habit of belittling me to feel bigger. "For the first time in my life," she wrote, "I'm having to do something truly hard on my own, and it's terrifying, but it's also real. I'm learning that my value doesn't come from what Mom and Dad buy me, but from what I can build myself. I hope one day I can show you I'm becoming someone better." I read the letter, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of something other than anger towards her. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. I didn't write back. Her journey was her own, and my healing still required distance. Her fall from grace, it seemed, was the painful, necessary catalyst for her to finally begin to build a life of substance. One evening, while organizing a box of old keepsakes, I came across a faded photograph of my grandmother and me, taken years ago in her sun-drenched garden. We were both laughing, heads thrown back in pure joy. Looking at that photo, I had a moment of profound clarity. The true inheritance she had left me wasn't $10 million. It was the courage to stand up for the truth. It was the clarity to finally see my own worth, independent of anyone else's opinion. And it was the freedom to build a life that was authentically, unapologetically mine. She had given me more than a fortune. She had given me back to myself. And that was a priceless gift no one could ever challenge, diminish, or take away. As I look back on that chaotic, transformative journey from the raw grief in a sterile conference room to the quiet, paint-scented peace I now feel in my studio, the most important lesson has crystallized into a simple truth. Family isn't always defined by blood. Sometimes, the family you are born into is just a starting point. True family are the people who see you, who believe in you, and who stand beside you when the world tries to tear you down. My grandmother was my true family. Mr. Henderson became family. The wonderful, creative souls who now fill my home with laughter are my family. I learned that your worth is not a reflection in someone else's distorted mirror. For years, I allowed my family's narrative to define me, to make me feel small, invisible, and less than. But the truth was, my quiet was never weakness. It was a wellspring of inner strength. My love for art wasn't a frivolous hobby. It was my soul's language, my purpose. And my kindness was not naivete to be exploited. It was, and is, my greatest asset. Sometimes, you have to lose the family you were given to finally be free to create the family you deserve. Their ultimate betrayal, as agonizing as it was, became my ultimate gift. It was the catalyst that freed me from a lifetime of trying to earn love from people who were incapable of truly giving it. It forced me to find my own power, to trust my own voice, and in doing so, I found everything that truly matters. Have you ever faced a situation where you had to make a difficult choice between keeping a toxic peace and standing up for your own truth and well-being? I would love to hear your story and your strength in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who might need a reminder that they are so much stronger than they think they are. Remember, the most valuable legacy you can ever build is a life that is authentic and true to who you are. Thank you for listening.